What if the one thing a man tries hardest to avoid is the very thing he ends up needing the most? The first snows of winter had begun to dust the Wyoming territory like flour on a baker's board. Caleb Ward pulled his collar higher against the biting wind as his horse, Dusty, picked carefully down the rutted trail toward Sagebrush Crossing. The cold stung his cheeks and crept through every seam in his coat, but he didn't complain. Winter had its own rhythm out here, and he'd learned that fighting it never helped. Enduring it did. The town sat low in a valley between two ridges, smoke rising from chimneys before the wind scattered it across a pale gray sky. Caleb had made this ride more times than he could count over the past 15 years, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the dull ache in his shoulder where an old cavalry wound liked to remind him he wasn't as young as he once was. Or maybe it was the early promise of a harsh season. The elk had already moved down from the high country, and the wolves had been howling closer to the settlements than usual. At 38, Caleb had seen enough winters to read the signs. This one would test every man in the valley. He shifted in the saddle and guided Dusty past the split-rail fence that marked the edge of town. Old Pete Hawkins swept the boardwalk in front of his barbershop. The widow Morrison hung laundry even though frost clung to every line. Both nodded at Caleb, and he returned the gesture, neither slowing nor stopping. People knew him well enough not to expect conversation. He kept to himself, and the town respected that. Inside Murphy's general store, the warmth hit him like a wall. A heavy, pot-bellied stove glowed red and filled the air with the scent of burning wood. The familiar smells of leather, coffee, and lamp oil wrapped around him as he stepped inside. "Caleb Ward," Tom Murphy said with a grin. "Haven't seen you in near 2 months. I figured you'd gotten yourself snowed in." "Not yet," Caleb replied. He pulled a folded list from his coat pocket. "Need supplies before the real cold sets in." Quote. Murphy started filling the order, moving from shelf to shelf with practiced ease. Flour, beans, coffee, salt, cartridges, lamp oil. While Caleb waited, he became aware of the conversation happening near the stove. 3 men warmed their hands and talked just loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm telling you, it ain't natural," Jake Brennan said. "A woman teaching school and she's not even married." What kind of example is that for the young ones? Doc Hartley pushed his glasses up his nose. "Times are changing, Jake. That new school teacher is doing fine work." "Children need learning more than gossip." "Learning's one thing," Jake muttered. "But I heard she told the mayor's wife women should have the vote." Silas Boone laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant. The big rancher leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest. "Let her preach whatever Eastern nonsense she wants. Come spring, she'll run back to Boston like all the others. This country's too hard for city flowers." Caleb kept his eyes on Murphy's hands, but something tightened in his jaw. He'd seen people break out here, yes, but he'd also seen the strongest souls come from the most unexpected places. A person's worth had nothing to do with where they came from. Murphy returned with the total. "That'll be $12.40. Caleb paid and began loading his supplies into canvas sacks, but before he stepped outside, Boone's voice carried again. "Speaking of weak roots," Boone said, "Ward, I've been meaning to talk to you about that spring on your land. That water could feed a lot of cattle." Caleb turned. "It's not for sale." Boone smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's for sale." "Not everything." A heavy silence fell. Murphy cleared his throat. The stove crackled. Caleb lifted the last sack and walked out without waiting for a reply. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snowflakes stung his skin as he tied the supplies to Dusty's saddle. He should head home before the weather worsened. But movement near the other end of town caught his attention. A crowd was gathering around the new schoolhouse. A woman's sharp voice rose above the wind. Firm, clear, unshaken. Caleb guided Dusty closer. There she stood, young, maybe 25, dressed in a simple gray dress and wool shawl. Auburn hair pinned neatly back, green eyes that burned like spring grass after a long winter. The new schoolteacher, Miss Hartwell. "Mr. Boone," she said from the steps of the schoolhouse. "The children of your ranch hands deserve an education. I won't turn them away because their fathers work wages instead of land." Boone stood below her, thick arms crossed, jaw tight. "Those children are needed for chores. Their parents can't spare them for school." "Then we'll arrange evening classes. I'm willing to." "You're willing?" Boone barked a laugh. "Little girl, you've been here 2 weeks. Don't presume you know how things work." She stepped down 2 stairs, bringing herself eye level with him. "Education is a right, not a privilege you get to hand out." The crowd gasped. Caleb felt something shift inside him: admiration, surprise, and something he didn't want to name. Boone stepped forward, his face darkening. "You need to learn your place." Quote, "I know my place," she said. "It's teaching children, all of them." The line stretched tight as a wire. Then Boone turned sharply and walked off, his boots crunching through the frost. The crowd broke apart, murmuring. Miss Hartwell turned to go inside, then stopped. Her eyes locked with Caleb's. Something passed between them, sharp as lightning, quiet as snowfall. Recognition, challenge, interest. She nodded once before stepping into the schoolhouse. Caleb exhaled. He wasn't sure he'd taken a full breath in the last minute. He turned Dusty toward home. The storm thickened with every mile, and by the time he reached his ranch, snow fell in heavy sheets. Inside his cabin, he unpacked supplies, lit a fire, and told himself the same thing he'd been saying for years. A quiet winter, that's all he wanted. No complications, no trouble. And definitely no fiery-eyed schoolteachers with green eyes and a spine of steel. So why couldn't he stop thinking about her? Why did the memory of her eyes bother him more than the threat of a Wyoming winter? Caleb woke before dawn the next morning, the fire's embers low but holding. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a world coated in thick white silence. He stepped onto the porch, boots sinking into fresh snow, breath fogging the cold air. Days like this usually settled his mind. Quiet, predictable, safe. But today his thoughts were far from quiet. They were stuck on a young woman who stood up to Silas Boone like he was nothing more than a stubborn steer. Stuck on the lift of her chin, the steadiness in her voice, the way she looked at him, not with fear or judgment, but with a question he couldn't name. "None of your business," he muttered to himself as he saddled Dusty. He had chores to do, wood to chop, livestock to feed. He didn't need to think about Miss Hartwell. Yet he did. He thought about her all the way back into town 2 days later. Market day. Sagebrush Crossing came alive on these Saturday mornings. Families from outlying homesteads bringing eggs, butter, knitted goods, and what little winter vegetables they still had. Children ran between stalls, and merchants shouted prices above the crowd. Caleb kept to the edges. He'd come for supplies, not conversation. But the moment he stepped into the square, he saw her. Clara Hartwell moved between the stalls, with her wool shawl pulled tight, her basket already half full. She paused at Mary Two Rivers, knitted goods, smiling warmly as the older woman talked. That smile did something to Caleb's chest he did not care to examine too closely. He turned away, ready to mind his business. But trouble found her first. Silas Boone strode toward her, 2 ranch hands at his sides. His expensive coat and polished boots didn't soften the sharp menace in his eyes. "Well, if it isn't our crusading schoolmarm," Boone said loudly. "I hear you've been filling the children's heads with ideas about women voting." Clara didn't even flinch. "I teach history, Mr. Boone. And Wyoming Territory gave women the vote in 1869. That's not an idea, that's a fact." "Facts can be dangerous," Boone growled, stepping closer. "Especially when they give people ideas above their place." Quote, "Ideas are what education is for," Clara answered calmly. "Ignorance is more dangerous than facts." Murphy paused his weighing of potatoes. Mrs. Henderson froze mid-bargain. The whole square seemed to hold its breath. Boone's face darkened. "You've got a sharp tongue. Sharp tongues get cut out here." Is that a threat, Mr. Boone? It's advice. Clara didn't back down, but Caleb saw the faint tremor in her hands. She wasn't scared. Not exactly, but she wasn't safe either. Then commotion broke loose near the livestock pens. A young colt, barely broken, had snapped his lead and bolted through the square. Stalls toppled, people shouted, and the horse barreled straight toward Clara. She didn't run. Instead, she stepped forward, speaking in a calm, steady voice. "Easy, easy there, boy." Caleb felt his stomach drop. She knew horses. Her posture said that much. But this wasn't a barn pony. This was frontier stock. Fast, panicked, deadly. "Move." Caleb growled under his breath, already breaking into a run. Clara reached for the dangling rope. A stall collapsed behind her. Someone screamed. The colt reared. Caleb lunged, grabbing her waist and pulling her back just in time. Her skirts tangled around her boots, and she stumbled against him. Warm, breathless, terrified, but standing. The colt's hooves slammed the ground where she'd been. Caleb didn't let go until he was sure she had her balance. "You all right?" he asked, voice rougher than he intended. She turned, eyes wide but steady. "Yes. Thank you." He stepped back, suddenly aware of how close she was, how soft her voice sounded in the cold air. He forced himself to focus on the colt, approaching it with calm confidence. Within seconds, he had the rope in hand. Jim Morrison rushed up, red-faced. "Sorry, Mr. Ward." He spooked when the dog barked. Caleb handed the lead rope over. "Work with him more before you bring him back to town." "Yes, sir." When he turned back, Clara stood watching him, her basket overturned, apples scattered on the snow. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, or from the way he'd pulled her close. "That was brave," Caleb said. "Foolish but brave." She bristled. "I know horses." "These aren't Eastern horses," he replied. "They don't care how well you speak to them." "I wasn't speaking to impress them," she said sharply. "I was trying to help." The edge in her voice almost made him smile. "You did help," he allowed. "Just try not to die doing it." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and walked away. He felt her eyes on his back the whole time. The sun dipped low by the time Caleb finished errands. He planned to ride home immediately, but as he passed the schoolhouse, a boy ran toward him. It was Timothy Sullivan, one of Clara's students. "Mr. Ward!" "Mama says Miss Hartwell's roof is leaking again. She's getting drenched every time it snows." Caleb groaned. "School board won't fix it?" Quote, "They say it's not important." Of course they did. He turned toward the schoolhouse before he could talk himself out of it. Clara opened the door when he knocked. Her hair was falling loose from its pins. Ink smudged her wrist, and she looked tired in a way she probably tried hard not to show. "Mr. Ward?" she asked, surprised. "Is something wrong?" "Roof leaks," he said simply. "Thought I'd look at it." "At this hour?" "Snow's coming tonight. Needs fixing." She hesitated, but only for a moment. "Let me get my shawl." They walked to the schoolhouse together. Inside, the air smelled of chalk and cold wood. Water stains marked the ceiling, worse than Caleb expected. "Shingles are shot," he said. "Probably been leaking for years. And the school board refuses to pay for repairs." Caleb glanced at her. Didn't ask about funds. She frowned. "Why are you helping me?" He paused. The room felt too small suddenly, too quiet. "My sister wanted to be a teacher," he said softly. "Before she died." Clara's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "Education matters," he said. "Kids deserve better than this." She studied him, that same steady, challenging way she'd looked at Boone. "I can help," she said. "I'm handy with tools." "In that dress?" She lifted her chin. "I have work clothes, Mr. Ward." He couldn't help it. His mouth twitched. "All right. Tomorrow, after church." Quote. They stood there a moment too long. Then Caleb touched his hat. "Good night, Miss Hartwell." "Good night, Mr. Ward." He stepped into the cold air, his pulse too fast, his thoughts too loud. This woman was trouble. A different kind of trouble than wolves or winters or Silas Boone. The kind that got under a man's skin. The kind that made a quiet winter feel suddenly impossible. What if the winter he tried to face alone became the season that changed everything? The next morning brought a warning no one ignored on the frontier, a strange stillness in the air. The sun rose behind a hazy veil, the wind low and heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. Caleb felt the shift in his bones the moment he stepped outside. A storm was coming, a bad one. He saddled Dusty quicker than usual and rode into town for church and to fix the schoolhouse roof before the weather broke. But when he reached Sagebrush Crossing, it wasn't the sky that worried him first. It was the stairs. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men frowned. The moment Clara Hartwell stepped into the churchyard, Caleb understood why. Word had spread. Someone claimed they'd seen him leaving her cottage after dark the night he'd checked on the schoolhouse. The story had twisted itself into something ugly, irresponsible, dangerous for her reputation. Clara held her head high, but Caleb saw the tightness in her jaw. Inside church, the tension thickened. People moved aside when she walked down the aisle. The pew beside her remained empty. Even the reverend stumbled through his sermon. When the service ended, she hurried toward the door, but 3 women blocked her path. Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Brennan, and Mrs. Cooper. "Miss Hartwell." Mrs. Henderson began sharply. "We need to discuss your situation." Caleb saw Clara stiffen. "My situation?" Quote, "Your conduct with Mr. Ward," Mrs. Brennan said pointedly. "Unchaperoned visits. Hours alone." Caleb stepped forward. "It wasn't like that." "Mr. Ward," Mrs. Henderson cut in, "this matter is between women." Clara lifted her chin. "Mr. Ward saved my life during last week's storm. Would you prefer he left me to freeze?" "That is not the point," Mrs. Henderson snapped. "Your behavior sets a poor example for the children. If you cannot show restraint, the school board may need to reconsider your employment." Caleb's blood ran cold. "You can't be serious." "She can," Clara said quietly. She didn't look at him, and she will. Mrs. Henderson sniffed, satisfied. "Distance yourself from Mr. Ward. Focus on your teaching. That is our final advice." The women swept away, leaving Clara pale but standing tall. Caleb reached for her arm. "Clara!" "Don't," she whispered. "Please." He stopped cold. "It will only make things worse if we're seen talking," she added. "I can handle this." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the truth. She felt alone. He wanted to pull her close, shielding her from the townsfolk like he would a fragile thing in a storm. But she stepped back. "I can't lose my position," she said. "The children need me." He nodded slowly, jaw clenching. "If that's what you want." Quote. But as she turned away, Silas Boone watched from across the yard, his smile cold. The next days were worse. Rumors grew like weeds. Boone fanned them proudly. Mrs. Henderson scolded parents about morality. Women avoided Clara in the market. Men looked at her with something between pity and suspicion. Still, she taught every day. Still, her students adored her. Still, she refused to let the cruelty break her. Caleb admired her more each day and was tortured by staying away. Then, one bitter afternoon, Boone stormed into her classroom, flanked by ranch hands. Clara stood protectively in front of her students. "You have no right to be here." Boone held up a paper, a petition signed by concerned citizens demanding your removal. The children watched with wide eyes, frightened. "Class dismissed," Clara said calmly. When the last child left, Boone stepped closer. "Resign, Miss Hartwell. Leave town, today." "If I refuse," she asked. "Then I call a public meeting," Boone said. "Expose your immorality, your secret meetings, your attempts to change the natural order." Quote. Clara's voice stayed strong. "You're doing this because of the children I teach, because you fear educated workers." "Think what you want," Boone said. "But you'll be gone by sundown." He left her alone in the silent classroom. Minutes later, Mary Two Rivers entered quietly. "That man's a snake," Mary said. "But even snakes can be cut down to size." Clara sank into her chair. "I can't keep fighting alone." "You won't," Mary said. "Not anymore." That night, as Clara walked the empty main street, Caleb stepped out from the shadows. "Clara!" She froze. His hat dripped snow. His coat was stiff with frost. But his eyes were warm, steady, determined. "I heard what he did," Caleb said. "I'm done staying away." "You can't." "I'm not asking," he said. "I'm telling you, I won't let that man ruin your life." The fight drained from her. "Caleb, I'm tired. I'm so tired." He stepped closer and cupped her shoulders. "Then don't fight alone." She looked up, tears burning. "You what?" she whispered. "I need you," he said, voice low. "I tried to keep my distance. I tried to stay quiet. But Clara, staying away from you is like trying not to breathe." Her breath caught. Slowly, gently, his hands lifted to her cheeks. "Tell me to leave, and I will. But if you want me to stay, I'm all in. All the way." Clara rose onto her toes and pressed her fingers to his lips. Then she whispered, "Stay." The kiss came slow at first, deep, warm, steady, like thawing ice. When they finally parted, people were staring. Mrs. Cooper dropped her basket in outrage. Clara laughed breathlessly. "Well, that settles the question of propriety." Caleb smiled, brushing snow from her hair. "Let them talk." "Let them," she echoed. And hand in hand, they walked down the street as if no one else existed. The town meeting that followed wasn't what anyone expected. Boone strutted in with his accusations ready, but Mary Two Rivers stood first, exposing Boone's lies, threats, forged signatures, and land schemes. Old Pete Hawkins rose next. Then Tom Sullivan. Then half the town. By the time they finished, Boone looked smaller than Caleb had ever seen him. When Caleb stood to speak, the room fell silent. "Miss Hartwell came here to teach," Caleb said. "She makes our children smarter. She makes our town better. And if it matters at all, yes, I love her. I plan to marry her if she'll have me." Gasps rippled through the hall. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. She hadn't known he would say it. Not like that. Not in front of everyone. The vote was taken. Unanimous. Clara Hartwell would stay. Boone stormed out, defeated. And later, under the stars outside her cottage, Caleb dropped to one knee in the snow. "Clara Hartwell," he said softly, voice shaking, "will you marry me?" She fell to her knees with him, tears glowing in the moonlight. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Caleb. 100 times yes." Their kiss tasted like hope, like spring, like every good thing waiting just beyond winter. Snow drifted around them, quiet and gentle. The cowboy who wanted a silent winter had found something louder, something braver, something worth losing control for. Love. And he no longer wanted to fight it.